The Philadelphia Eagles trade for Jahan Dotson continues a trend that Howie Roseman has been following for the last few years, and it's led to a lot of successful moves. We'll get into that and more coming your way on this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri. We're brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and you're going to get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. One more day before the Eagles preseason finale against the Minnesota Vikings. Weird, Gino, it's not the New York Jets. That's normally who they, growing up, they conclude the preseason with, but I kind of like that they're switching it up. Players to watch, we'll get into that later on in the show, but I did want to continue talking about the trade yesterday for Washington Commanders wide receiver Jahan Dotson, and we really got deep into the move yesterday, and for so many reasons, we love this trade, Gino, but at the same time, what I like about it, it continues this theme since the 2020 draft. Why Howie's been nailing wide receiver so much is, you've talked about it a lot, and Nick Sirianni has alluded to this. I think you want guys with different skill sets, right? You want your offense to be able to do everything. That's why you like to build it in the form of like a basketball team. You want somebody that can go up and high point the football and win those 50-50 balls. You want the run after the catch guy. You want the route technician. But I think sometimes when Howie was he got tunnel vision of trying to fit like certain players into a certain trait, he would lose out on the better player. And I'm not saying you want guys that can do it all. Like you want a fast guy, you want a bigger player. You don't want just a bunch of people that do one thing or people that don't do the next. But I think what the Eagles have been doing lately is they want everybody to be versatile. They want completeness in players. And I think that's just allowed for this offense to be so much more multidimensional, and I think it will be even more like that this year with Kellen Moore, and Jahan Dotson kind of continues to fit that theme. I mean, this is a player that's played inside and out his career in the NFL.
That's why scouting is such an art as opposed to a pure science, because when you're breaking down the tape on players, you're always going to have that bias of what do we need to fix, right? Like it's always going to be elevated a little bit. So if you look back to that 2020 season, of course, Howie Roseman is looking at it and saying speed, speed, speed. Like, let's just get guys that can continue to burn, guys that we don't have that fit a role that right now it might be a little short-sighted to go all in, but we think that player could potentially develop into a role that we see bigger than what they currently have. The thing is, and I look strictly at the Jalen Reagor move, like if I'm looking at it in a vacuum right now, the reason to me that it did not work out was Howie Roseman, like you said, Jalen Reagor lacked the completeness as a wide receiver. And I think you're seeing that now with a similar player in Quentin Johnston over with the Chargers, that they do one thing very good to elite, right? And that's great when you're getting into like day 3 territory.
Yeah, that could be a role player.
That's a role player for you. Right. Exactly. But when you're talking about the players you need to invest day 1 picks on, it has to be a player like a Devontae Smith, right? Yes. Somebody that you have seen enough examples of that. We always talk about the floor. What is the floor with this type of player? You see the completeness with A.J. Brown. You see the completeness with a guy like Devontae Smith that, yes, they do have 1 or 2 individual traits that they're very elite at, right? Like play strength for A.J. Brown. Right. He's an elite in that measure. You talk about Devontae Smith's ability to run routes. He's elite in that measure. But they at least are a jack of all trades in the other departments that they can get by, even if it's not a strong point with their game. Jalen Reagor, when you go back to that example, Lou, he had the speed, but what else could he do?
He had
50-50 ability at points, but besides that, he wasn't a pure route runner. He wasn't somebody that really understood how to beat zone defenses, like sitting in space as football.
He wasn't even that athletic laterally. Like downfield speed was there, but Gino, he wasn't that fluid as an athlete.
He ran like 3 routes when he was coming out of TCU, and there was a huge development factor to it. And that's great for a day 2, a day 3 player where development is key. And shout out to Aaron Moorhead, how he's been able to try and get the best out of these guys. And sometimes there is a ceiling. Like look at Quez Watkins, a day 3 player, had a single niche. He was good at getting
or Johnny Wilson. Look at Johnny Wilson.
Yeah, his size, his ability. Britton Covey, for example, too. Like in short areas, he can move. But do they have another element? Do they have another pitch? For role players, that's exactly what they have to be. But for the guys up top, and even for those guys that are pseudo starters, like a wide receiver 3, like your tight end 2, that's why Grant Calcaterra, you have to be more than just a pass catcher. You have to be able to block as well. You have to be like a Brent Selleck type of player to an extent, where look at Brent Selleck when he came in the league, Lou. He was strictly a blocker. He developed that passing element of his game, and he became a player that had a long tenure. But those guys that, if they can't expand off of that one pitch, it's like a fastball pitcher in baseball. If you can't develop a curveball, if you can't find a slider, you're never going to become more than just a role player. And if you don't do that role well, Philly's going to move on. Look at Quez Watkins. It's the clearest example. And look at the upgrade with Jahan Dotson. They at least see a floor with this guy, and other teams around the league did, because he was the 16th overall pick in the draft just a couple years ago. And they believe the people they have in-house can develop him to where they could potentially reach the ceiling with 1 or 2 of those elite traits. But they know with him, he has a higher floor than the rest of the guys that they have in the building right now.
Yeah, and it stops you from saying, well, yeah, we wanted the speed element, but Jalen Reagor can only line up here. He can only do these things. Therefore, we're kind of handcuffing what we can do with Devontae Smith or what we can do with A.J. Brown. And that's the thing is like, yes, you want each trait. You want to have that speed element on offense. You want to have the size. If you want to do something specific, you want to have a player that has that ability, and maybe that could be a tiebreaker between 2 very close prospects or players you're looking to sign or trade. But like if you have too much of something, yeah, you don't want to add another guy in that way. If you don't have enough of something, like that might be a big factor in a decision. But at the same time, I think you can't get too hyper-focused on that. And you just got to add complete, versatile players. And I think that is what Dotson is, Gino. Like he played, like his catch rate is higher in the slot, but crazy enough, you said it yesterday, and I looked up the specific numbers. It's true. It was 2-1 when it comes to snaps on the outside versus in the slot. He had over 1,000 snaps on the outside and then a little over 500 inside. So that's a guy that is not going to stop you from doing whatever you want with Brown, with Goddard, with Smith, heck, even with Saquon Barkley or Will Shipley, like Kellen Moore, especially in a Kellen Moore offense. These are the kind of players you need.
I keep going back to 2017 now because I think it's just such a perfect analogy, right? Like was Nelson Aguilar, you talk about him, he was probably overdrafted. He had a couple things that he did really well, but I don't think his ceiling was ever going to get there. But he had a good enough floor to where he could be that second or third guy for you. And look at in 2017 how good he was in that role. That's what you're looking for in Jahan Dotson. Maybe at the time, Washington was a little short-sighted, i.e. the Eagles with Jalen Reagor, that maybe this guy fit our plan at the time, but he doesn't fit our plan now. For Philadelphia, their plans have been laid out, and they just needed to bring somebody in that I say the analogy all the time, and I used it at ad nauseum. The people in YouTube comments were correcting me. Sorry, I get all these cliches wrong. But when you're looking at what Jahan Dotson can do for you in that regard, it's the floor. It's the ability to, like you said, not handcuff yourself, not allow defensive coordinators to hone in on your offense, give them any tip of the hand at all. And to me, Lou, with Jalen Reagor, when you made that pick, it was so short-sighted. It was unbelievably short-sighted at the time because you were saying, can this guy develop into a number 1 for us? They thought, but that was only because you had guys there like Deshaun Jackson who did develop. Like everybody's not the same, and you can't look at it like that. And within their role, can they develop into that player, not just hitting that corner 3, but hey, sometimes they might have to step inside the arc and be good enough to hit a 2, and maybe they have to be good enough at hitting a floater, and they have to be good enough in the paint, but they do one thing really well with a high enough floor. That's where you're going to be able to win with guys. You can't have any players you were winning in spite of. Quez Watkins, Jalen Reagor, to where you almost had to hide these players to an extent. They have to be somebody that when they get the ball in their hand, they can't pee down their leg. Like, unfortunately, you have to make plays when your number is called, or they're going to find somebody else. Exactly what they're doing right now.
Well, Saturday night, a lot of these players in the Eagles have an opportunity to become role players if they can make the 53-man roster. What players should we be watching for Eagles-Vikings? We'll get into that on this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we are brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. When your schedule is packed, and this football season, we're all pretty busy, but you've got kids' schedules, big work projects, all that and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. So give BetterHelp a try through online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge if it's not the right fit. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today. You'll get 10% off your first month of online therapy. Once again, it's BetterHelp.com/lockedon for 10% off. We thank BetterHelp for sponsoring the Locked On Eagles podcast today. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, make sure your second listen is the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I've got my draft tomorrow, so I've been listening at nauseum. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Did I just mess up the analogy too?
Yeah, you said ad nauseum. That's the one thing, if you've listened to this show at all over the years,
we got some grammar police on our YouTube channel, man.
At analogies. I get them wrong all of the time. But
we're just shooting from the hip, man. We do a show every day. Give us a break.
Every single day. We don't script this out. We're just talking. And guys,
what is the saying? How do you say it?
It's ad nauseum. Ad nauseum. Ad nauseum.
I've been using that incorrectly my entire life.
Dude, there's so many phrases. This is a Mandela effect thing. And yeah, the Mandela effect of
that's true.
Nelson Aguilar never being good. And now
there we go.
One thing you always fight the fight on. So I love it.
All right, Gino, Eagles-Vikings tomorrow night, the preseason finale. I feel like this roster is looking pretty set. I think there's still, though, a couple spots when it comes to backup jobs that are up for grabs, and it could be a player added through another team if these guys don't step up on Saturday. Who do you think needs to step up the most? Like, who are you really watching against Minnesota?
Who needs to step up, or who can win themselves a job?
Who can win themselves a job, yeah.
EJ Jenkins.
With Philly, with the Eagles specifically.
EJ Jenkins, like, specifically, I think if he can go out there and put up another good game where he's leading the team close to the top of the team in receptions, makes another splash play or two, does some things in the run game, I believe that they're whittling that position down, and it's either going to be him. I don't think it's going to be Albert O. Like, he hasn't shown you next to anything in over a calendar year at this point.
Yeah.
Probably a practice squad candidate, or somebody will claim him. EJ Jenkins, I think a lot of people are proponents of him. Like, he's a Ja'Cory Shepherd potential award winner, where he has a good camp, has a good offseason, kind of comes out of nowhere. And when nobody really stepped up at that pass catcher position, Lou, outside of the expected guys, like you knew Covey would have his moments at time, and some of the younger guys will have some fourth quarter garbage time stuff. But one guy who really stepped up, man, he had some wow catches. That pass from Will Grier that was over his back shoulder, and he turns around and full extension. Like, that's a play that on film teams are going to look at. And I would be a big fan if EJ Jenkins made it, because it would give you some semblance of comfort knowing that you don't have to bring in somebody else, and that maybe you feel good enough if Grant Calcaterra does go out, he could potentially be a number 2 option for you.
Yeah, is he a better version of a Joshua Perkins? Like, I think that's kind of...
That's all you have to be in that
Perkins
role, right?
came in 2019 and made some plays down the stretch when Carson Wentz needed a guy. So can EJ Jenkins be that? I think he can be even more. And I think he's a player to definitely watch, especially with CJ Uzomah gone.
Perkins, man. Perkins,
yeah, he's way more athletic.
Brick wall running around.
And Jenkins was a receiver at one point, correct?
Yeah, he's a converted to tight end, but he's picked up the blocking element much better than these converted wide receivers in my
So I think Jenkins is a guy that can really win a job, especially with Uzoma gone. He's somebody to keep a close eye on. I think too, like you look at the secondary, like there might be 1 or 2 spots left. Can Eli Ricks grab that? Is it Josh Jobe? Heck, can Zach McPherson make some big plays on special teams, or even like a James Bradbury? We'll see. But I'm also watching those corners, Gino, also from a trade perspective. Let's see if any of them can have a big game so you can flip one of them into a pick that you can recoup from that Dotson trade. So, of course, the question is who can win a job for the Eagles, but also who can do a good job maybe getting the Eagles some compensation, and then they earn a job with another team. Like that's a possibility too. A lot of these players, like they're not just fighting for their life with the Eagles, they're fighting for their life in the NFL. Like a lot of these guys are trying to put on tape for the rest of the league too.
It's just one of the common things that this last week is kind of like a showcase week, and you'll see teams kind of keep players out there that you're like,
because some players know they're not going to make this team.
Here's an interesting one for you, Lou.
Yeah.
What if Kenny Pickett plays the whole game?
Ooh, and they're trying to showcase him to the league? I would love that. That'd be music to my. If they play him the whole time, I'm going to be very happy.
If Tanner McKee doesn't come out after halftime,
yeah, it's a good point. We should watch the quarterback
snap
count.
Or if Kenny Pickett is not dressed at all, you kind of have a good idea that he's probably the number 2,
which will probably be my prediction.
Yeah, and seeing the first report, is he on the sideline in a ball cap or is he warming up? That'll be huge.
Point.
But if he does dress, Lou, and he plays a little bit longer, like when are we going to see Will Grier? When are we going to see Tanner McKee? Those are the type of things that you look at. Like I see in your defensive back discussion, I mentioned this on yesterday's show, Eli Ricks is like a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Or like a Josh Jobe, if those guys take a lot of those snaps where you're like, okay, we've seen enough up top with Keeley and those guys aren't going to really play. You'll see some of Cooper DeJean tonight, but if it's like Josh Jobe played 70 snaps and that's 100% of the snaps tonight, that might be a guy that you're looking to say, hey, maybe we can move him. And teams are looking to trade, man. The Eagles weren't the only one. Cade York was moved yesterday from the Browns to the Commander. Daryl Taylor was just traded, a former round pick from Seattle to the Bears for a 6th rounder. Teams are going to be active, Lou. So I would say if you want to have an educated guess as a fan after these couple games here on Saturday, go check out the snap counts of other teams as well. Those rooms that we've been talking about, the depth at tight end for some teams, the depth potentially at, let's say you need another linebacker if you're not in love with Ben Van Sumeren, or another safety. Go check out the snap counts because that is the most telling thing of how teams favorite players.
I am excited too to watch Cooper DeJean. Gino, I think this is a guy we haven't seen.
You look in the mirror every day and see, what are you talking about?
We haven't seen him in action all year because he's been podcasting so much. But no, actually, I think, he's had a little bit of a slow start since he come back from injury. I don't think he was 100%. So he's just knocking the rust off, right? But want to see how he looks in the slot, where Vic Fangio uses him. And will he be used as a returner at all? He was very good as a returner in college at Iowa. Do they use him in that way? Maybe try to get him a role early on, try to get him on the field. If
better
Mitchell
Kenny,
is the slot.
like you don't need to see Kenny Gainwell return kicks.
Yeah, I've seen enough. To me, I would love a combo of like Cooper DeJean, Will Shipley back there. I mean, that's something. If DeJean's going to be the 4th corner on the depth chart and it's going to be Quignon inside, I want him out there doing something. And he definitely has return ability. Like that was a big part of his game at Iowa.
I honestly wouldn't be shocked if Britton Covey doesn't play tonight, but if he
I don't think he will. Yeah.
I only want to see him as a receiver, and that's in limited minutes. Like, let the younger kids figure out that
see what else you
situation right now, because exactly. If Covey isn't the guy at kick returner, let's say, Kenneth Gainwell has so many examples. Like, I don't care.
Yeah, we know what it is. He's going to get to the 23-yard line every time. No more, no less. Time. Yeah.
See what Cooper DeJean could potentially do for you. See what Will Shipley or Anais Smith could potentially do for you.
Yeah, Anais Smith, big game for Anais too, man, especially with Dotson in.
He might be the other pass catcher that has the most to either win or lose tonight. Like, he's sitting on the fence, and if he is like the one guy that they could rely on and like they target him multiple times and he comes up with some big plays, Lou, grow off of that 2-point conversion that you converted last week, that's a step in the right direction for him. I still would say he's favorable towards the practice squad, not somebody who would probably be claimed, but he's a guy tonight that if you're going to put on a showcase for your guys, not to show to the rest of the league, but put out enough tape that your coach can at least evaluate you, That's one of those guys that you're talking about, Lou. And even a Zach McPherson, who you don't really know what he is at this current point in time, continue to put him out there. And I think these linebackers continue to rotate them through. And same with the young defensive lineman, man. Like, who's going to win a job there? Is Thomas Booker going to overtake a guy like Ben Van Summeren, who might be the next special teams guy, or a Patrick Johnson? Like, those are the type of guys. And I want to say one final salute to Ron Jackson. It's been an absolute pleasure watching.
Been a good run.
If you don't end up in Philadelphia, I'm a big fan. I think he did some things for you at times where he should have made the team. Hopefully he can stick on this practice squad. But after tonight, Lou, you're going to see some good football players find themselves in jobs outside of Philadelphia. And like, I'm happy to see them, but at the same time, it's like you're going to lose some really good young talent after this week, man. It's just the realness of being a stacked roster at this current point in time, where we're having these discussions not on who's winning a starting job, who's winning these depth battles. And I think that's where you and I would like to have these discussions. So when we go into week one, we can focus on the big dogs. Money's in the crumbs right now.
Yeah, and you look at, going back to receiver real quick too, we mentioned Anais Smith. Like, there's 4 guys locked in now at receiver, like Smith, Brown, Dotson, Covey, and maybe Johnny Wilson too. So there's, unless they stash him on IR, but I don't
Somebody's
think so.
I would think he would be claimed, man. Like, some
team
no. With that.
There's 5 guys locked in. Is Paris Campbell safe? Like, he has to play tomorrow probably to earn a job.
Ooh,
like,
you think?
I don't know. I mean, he hasn't played all camp.
Okay.
Maybe they'd rather keep their 5th round rook. Now that they know they don't need one of these guys to step up because they have Dotson, maybe the conversation changes of who they want to keep. Maybe they'd rather keep their 5th round developmental player than a 28-year-old veteran on a 1-year deal. Like, so the Dotson trade might help Smith over Campbell.
Really? That's how you view this? Just
because the perspective changes. If it was who you need to play, you keep Campbell if Dotson was on the team. But now that you have Dotson, you suddenly don't need Campbell as much. Which gives you some flexibility to keep your draft pick.
Oh, I wish we had brought this up earlier, but I look at it with the Nick Sirianni element, dude. Every single year he's had a former Indianapolis Colt at his disposal. Like, that's a Nick versus a Howie type of move now.
We'll see what happens. We'll see who wins that battle. Because if Anais is kept, it's a Howie move.
That's
and
what
if
we're talking about with snap counts. Like, if you see Paris Campbell playing essentially the whole game, I think that's a good understanding that he might be one of those guys that you're saying, did he lose a job because of this? And the Smith element, saying that it favors Smith with the addition of Dotson because they have that veteran piece that they might have been looking for.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But could they also look at him, Lou, as almost an upgrade over Olamide Zaccheaus or a Josh Pascal, where they do value that number 4 highly?
And maybe they use Campbell on special teams. Like, maybe they want Paris Campbell trying to return.
Oh, man, he might be the one guy that, like, now that you're saying it, has arguably the most to lose tomorrow. Or
if he better play. I mean, he hasn't been on the practice field. That's the problem too. So we'll see tomorrow. There's a lot to watch. Like, it's normally whatever.
The last week of the preseason would have this many questions for a team that has already done a really good job figuring out things.
Week 3 of the preseason. It's for the real football sickos like us.
Yeah. If you're not watching all of the game tomorrow, get out of our YouTube comments. Get out of our we are talking to these people. You are the ones that we're
This is for the real sickos.
These are the everydayers here at LOE, man.
Speaking of real sickos, we had a fun question for Fan Friday regarding Eagles wide receiver 3s. We'll get into that coming up next as we wrap up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles.
This episode of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the right tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. This Saturday, a lot of those guys are going to be adding to their resume. Do they have to polish it up that they could potentially get a job around the NFL? And hey, maybe if you want to get a job in football or get a job in accounting or get a job in healthcare, whatever it is, go to LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but may be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional. on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. The way we always do, we hear from our listeners over at our YouTube community page. And Gino, this one has to do with wide receiver 3, and that's very good timing as the Eagles traded for Jahan Dotson yesterday. Undoubtedly, he will be the third guy behind A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, so no more need for Paris Campbell to be that guy, or Johnny Wilson, or Britton Covey. And again, Gino, like real quick before we get into the question, those guys, as you mentioned yesterday, they would have been fine, but man, does this offense just, it was already loaded, but Dotson over those guys, like even if Dotson is who he was last year, it really is on another level.
Yeah, it just gives you a good peace of mind, especially
There's no questions I have now really about this offense outside of just like the bigger, like philosophical ones.
Yes, philosophically, like what if somebody goes down? Like
or like the relationships between like on the field personnel wise, like I have no problems with anything.
Yeah, put the 53 man down, like open the our lads depth chart, and like you got to feel good about the situation that you're in. And Lou, I think one thing, camp is over. We're going to see the game tomorrow. I'm sure people might pick up a knock here or there. But to see a team like the Buffalo Bills and see their injuries right now, and to see the lack of major injuries sustained in this Eagles camp, where they have taken some hard hits in past seasons, that might be the biggest thing right now, Lou. And to see all these guys that we're talking about at the wide receiver position, injuries is the one spot where they've kind of been hit a little bit with the concussion to Paris Campbell, with the concussion to Johnny Wilson. Would they have been all right there? I haven't seen anything out of those guys to really know outside of Britton Covey, so I just wanted to play devil's advocate.
No, I actually get that, and that's the perk of being a younger team, Gino, for once, is you just don't get hurt as much, right? Like, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, there's been so many summers where the Eagles at this point were limping to the start line. And that's why sometimes they would get off to
Leotis
slow starts.
McAlvin, like, he literally was playing a season on one hamstring.
Or, like, I mean, 2020, Lane Johnson, by August, they said, like, his ankle was barely together. And
yeah,
like,
it was on by, like,
how many times was Jason Peters hurt? Yeah, so Carson Wentz would get banged up in camp. I mean, everybody was getting hurt back then. And so, yeah, I agree. That's a huge part of this team's success early on in seasons is they're healthy and they're younger than they've been in the past. Before we wrap up the show, Derek writes in on our YouTube community page, now that Dotson is wide receiver 3, rank your top 5 Eagles wide receiver 3s since in the last 15 years. So I think, Gino, we can start with Jason Avant and on.
We'll always hold
the post Jason Avant world. Like, he is the start, right? Like, he is who remains, and then after Avant. So your top 5. That's fun. I like that.
That is a good one. I mean, credit to Jason Avant for what he did, man. You talk about reliability. Like, you talk about an elite trait.
The perfect complement to the kind of guys you had on that offense.
Dude, the guy had like one drop a season.
Yeah, because you had a deep threat. You had Macklin was a pretty complete player, and then you had the flashy running back in McCoy. You just needed that like meat and potato slot guy, and that was Avant.
Okay. I think
I'm putting Nelly 1.
2017 Nelson Aguilar.
Yeah,
and then the rest of Nelson Aguilar get out of
it. But 2017, and I'll say 2018 too. That Nelly to me is 1. I'd say Avant probably 2.
Oh, I was saying Avant 1.
Avant 1. Okay, Nelly 2. I'm going to put Nelly 1, and I'll say Avant 2.
Okay, so we differ there a little bit.
Does Jordan Matthews count? I don't think he was ever a 3. He was always 1 or 2.
No, he was never a 3. He was the 2
unless you count like 2018.
What about when
but he was the 4th behind
there? Who was the number 2 to J Mac and him?
I think it was Matthew. Riley Cooper was the other guy, but I think Matthews was the 2.
Let's just say he was the 3 just because he was a rookie. Like maybe that's Jordan Matthews' rookie year because they did
2018. No, he was 4th technically because Golden Tate was your 3rd guy.
Yeah, Golden Tate because of that big moment. Like maybe he's number 4
over Torrey Smith.
Oh, well, when is Torrey your number 3? You
2017.
You count him as the 3 over Nelson Aguilar?
Oh, yeah. Aguilar was your second focus. Like, when it comes to, like, who was the go-to guy, Torrey was 3. Just because he played on the outside, to me, doesn't mean he wasn't the 3.
So I'll go, okay.
I'd say Torrey Smith is 3rd.
Jason Avant
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You do yours first.
You're reclassifying Nelson Aguilar here. Like you're like
correct. I'm making it work. I'm making it work.
He's like somebody who plays for the French national team, but his last name's Smith. You're like, what are we talking about here? He's our number 3 receiver. Okay. Number 1, Jason Avant. Number 2 and 3 split Nelson Aguilar, Torrey Smith.
Okay, I'll
go there. Number 4. Who else did we say? Number 5.
So Golden Tate. You could say Tate. If you want to put Dotson in there based on talent, but he hasn't played yet.
I would probably put him a little bit higher.
I think Dotson will be pretty high on this list.
This is a tough one. Yeah,
maybe Golden Tate just because of the playoff win because he scored the game-winning touchdown.
Tate 5, Jahan Dotson right now 4, Nelson Aguilar 3, Torrey Smith 2. Jason Avant 1.
All right, I pretty much agree with that. I might just put Aguilar Smith 1, but outside of that, I think that's chalk. I agree.
No, man,
no love for 2021 Quez Watkins. Oh, he was actually the 2 that year because Rager was
the 2. Yeah, that's why you can get in like to the nitty gritty here. I would like to hear like some underrated guys that the fans think, but man,
too bad Mike Wallace got hurt in 2018. Man,
how far have we come from a world of Bryce Treggs and Josh Huff and Dorial Green Beckham. And
Mike Wallace in 2018 at one point was in line to be
Mike
the 3.
Wallace was in that
and then he broke his leg in week 2 against Tampa Bay.
They never even saw the field.
That'll be a fun one in like 5 years when everybody forgets Mike Wallace was an Eagle. That'll be great trivia.
I want to ask you this, though.
Yeah.
Favorite trio already right now? This one? Or
this one? Over who?
The one that...
D-Jax, Mack, and Avant. Man, the kid in me is screaming for D-Jax, Mack, and Avant, but I think it's this one. It's got to be.
As a group, though, with Saquon, with Dallas, I take this one a billion times.
This, to me, is going to be the most fun offense I think the Eagles have ever seen.
Yeah,
and that's saying something because they've had some
most talent, man.
Or it has the most. It has that kind of potential. Yeah.
Yeah, so, it has like those Randall Carmichael, like Mike Quick, like crazy speed, athleticism on the outside.
Every time PFF makes one of those graphics of just like the offensive personnel, like I can't stop looking at them. It's just like it's unbelievable to me the talent the Eagles
doesn't make
right
much
now.
sense at all.
I genuinely cannot believe it. I just wanted one of these
especially because where they were, like they drafted Josh Huff in the 3rd round, traded a 3rd rounder for Golden Tate.
Well, I think back to 2020, man. Like we were talking about Rager and Dotson at Penn State. I was screaming for KJ Hamler for them to draft KJ Hamler out of Penn State. Like we were just that's how desperate we were for passing targets. And now it's like, I don't know. We're how are we going to get the ball to Will Shipley? I mean, it's just ridiculous.
So, how do we get our 9th guy in this game?
Man, first world problems for sure. We'll see what happens tomorrow night. Eagles-Vikings preseason finale. Gino and I will have our final 53-man roster predictions after that. Big cut down, big week next week, and then we get ready for the regular season right here on Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. We're all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.